Welcome to the Spirit of Truth video podcast. Joining me today is my good friend, Halbert Katzen. Welcome, Halbert.
Hey, thank you very much, Derek. Happy to be here.
All right. Well, Halbert is an interesting cat in that he's done a lot of research through the Urantia Book around many controversial topics, one could say, especially around race and ancient history. When I met Halbert, he was doing a project called UB the News, Urantia Book the News, where he's going on over a lot of academic studies and bringing out truths in the Urantia Book in ways that a lot of people didn't know, and it might just be steeped in mystery or occult or who knows what. But now he's evolved that into UB Annotated. It's at ubannotated.com, and there's a lot of great studies there that people can reference. I myself do that. I know that we referenced that for one of the study groups we did on ancient history, where Halbert went in a deep study on the microcephalin gene and the whole eugenic gene theory that was coming from the blood of Adam and Eve into mankind. And so he found ways where you can isolate that and spot that and then have further discussion around that. And some of that's a little controversial. He's also done good things with ancient artifacts like Göbekli Tepe and sites that severely outdate some of the biblical narratives and are just really intriguing that really only the Urantia Book really fleshes out. So he's done a great job of taking all those truths from the Urantia Book and applying them into modern day findings and some things we haven't found or need help putting together. So that's where the revelation really helps. That's something I appreciate, something I do. And so it's why I felt that Halbert has the credibility to speak on what we're speaking today. And I'm just going to briefly introduce the topic and then toss it to Halbert to fill us in on his experience. But recently in Chicago, there was a controversial issue around one of the founding forum members of the Urantia Book when it first came through in Chicago. And because of current politics, there was removal of name from school building because of their affiliation with some of these controversial concepts in the Urantia Book. So Halbert took it upon himself to be the one guy who actually went down there in this school board meeting and defend what was actually going on in the Urantia Book and what Alvin Kulieke was actually doing and not doing. And I thought that this was a great opportunity for all of us to get a good insight into what happened, what can happen, and good talking points to learn from a lot of this hard work that Halbert's done. So I know that was a little long, but we appreciate what you do and that you were out there doing this, and hopefully you could just maybe walk us through the initial reasons why you went down there.
Sure. Thank you for that introduction. So, to just pull together your introduction a bit into what just happened is, as you mentioned, I got started really with documenting how new discoveries and scientific advances are catching up to the Urantia Book. That occurred in the field of genetics, that occurred with discovery of ancient artifacts like Göbekli Tepe. And I realized I was leading people into areas about eugenics and race, by introducing them to those topics that showed the Urantia Book's credibility, but brought up all kinds of controversial issues. And so I set about to do comprehensive reviews and studies of race and eugenics in the Urantia Book. And so that put me in a position where when this issue came up, I felt called to respond because I'm the person in the community who's been most involved with this particular aspect of Urantia Book studies that are, as you mentioned, especially controversial. And I think I just want to, remind ourselves here from the beginning that when it comes to discussing issues of race, eugenics, genetics, family, government, how all of this stuff interconnects, it's highly controversial, separate from the Urantia Book. I mean, these subjects just in general are things that people have a very difficult time coming together on, even philosophically and scientifically, let alone practically through culture and government. So, yeah, it's really a hot topic, and we've seen it come up a lot just in the news recently with what's her name, Sydney Sweeney, and the advertisement for jeans and the play on that word.
I
So
know. Yeah, that was an ironic.
it's really something. So what happened is that, as you mentioned, Alvin Kulieke was involved in the early days of developing the Urantia book into publication, and that involved being part of a group called the Forum that reviewed the text to help it improve and be the best that it could be. And then he was president of the Urantia Brotherhood once it got published, and a social organization started. And so he lived up in the Chicago area where the Urantia book was originally published. And he lived near Mount Prospect and became the first principal of the Mount Prospect High School back in the 1950s.
Okay.
And he served for quite a while. And then in the 70s, after he died, they named the theater after him in honor of his service to the high school. So that was all well and good for decades. And then a sophomore student at the high school decided to look into the history of the theater and discovered that when the theater first, opened up and the high school was new back in the days of segregation, there were some minstrel shows performed, and minstrel shows were a tradition that had blackface as part of the entertainment, as part of the theatrical entertainment.
Right.
So by today's standards, that's a no-no, and you're not supposed to play like that. That's not fun anymore, and you're not allowed to do it. But back then, that was fun, and you were allowed to do it, and people did, and they enjoyed it. There wasn't any controversy at that time under those circumstances.
At that time, yes.
At that time. But when the sophomore looked at it today, she applied contemporary standards to historical circumstances, which, I'll just say that it's not a good idea, to judge the past by contemporary standards, because it really undermines the whole idea of progress.
Right.
It's like, if we're going to progress, we're going to have that issue. And we need to be sure about it and not just beat on people because they're not living in modern times or something.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
So this is what set her off. Okay, that's the point. The blackface and the minstrel shows, and so he became a target in her eyes. And she looked at his biography or bio or whatever they had about him, and I think it was a what do you call it, an obituary, basically.
Oh, right.
Like it was a just brief, who was Alvin Kulieke kind of thing.
Sure.
And it mentioned that he, I think, had been president of Urantia Foundation. I'm sorry, not Urantia Foundation, Urantia Brotherhood. Excuse me.
Right. Okay.
I misspoke. Urantia Brotherhood. So that led her to the Urantia book, and so that led her to poor sources of information about the Urantia book, in short. And she wrote a highly defamatory article in the high school newspaper and also did a podcast about it, defaming Alvin Kulieke and the Urantia book and calling for his name to be taken off the theater.
Right.
So that's the event, that set all this off. This is why you're talking to me. This is why I had something to respond to.
Well, how much time did? Yeah, and so I know that just happened this year. It's pretty recent. How much time did you have to find out about this and then realize that you could go to a board meeting in Prospect?
Right. Thank you. So that happened pretty quickly. I mean, from my perspective, I don't know, but I think her article came out around early May. Mm-hmm. I might have learned about it from Google alerts or something like that I used to try to keep track of issues like eugenics and the Urantia book. And, I think it popped up. And
okay. So
that was early May. By July, the school district had a meeting about it, which I attended. It is about almost a 6-hour drive from me. I'm in southern Indiana. But I went up there and I stayed with Marilyn Kulieke,
Oh,
who's
cool.
a in-law relation to the Kulikes, a daughter-in-law, and she unfortunately couldn't make it to the meeting. She wanted to, but had some considerations that got in her way uh,
Hmm.
for the July meeting, and so I attended alone as the sole person defending the Urantia book. At one of these school district meetings, it was very typical where they give the public a chance to speak. You have 3 minutes to speak. It's not interactive. It's just like your free speech opportunity to address the board. And as well, of course, you could send in emails and communicate with them through email, but the in-person opportunity was very similar to what we often see in social media when, people get up before some governmental body and get to state their case about something. So, so that's what I did. I also want to mention that when I went to attend that meeting, um, I went early and I ran across the principal and had a more extended and interactive conversation with the principal for 10 or 15 minutes before it got started, and was very happy to have had an opportunity like that, to get a little bit more acquainted with the people and find out what they were thinking and how they were communicating about it.
Sure, sure.
The sophomore who wrote the article, I heard, was on vacation with her family when they had the meeting, and so she wasn't there.
Interesting.
We had requested in an effort to allow Marilyn Kulieke to attend, had sent a message, well in advance, I think several weeks in advance, requesting that it be postponed till August so that she could attend.
Mm.
But they declined that. And so this is one example of how I feel there's been a rush to judgment, and that, it's sort of typical
Yeah.
of the times, and we have to, get on this right away and give this student satisfaction and honor her
Well, and also
efforts.
in that vein, I've noticed a pattern with this kind of culture that cancels people from different times is that not only are they accusing those who can't represent themselves, but also they don't come to represent and let the accuser see the person being accused, right? So it's like, here we are trying to defend that which is being accused. You were there, and the accuser isn't now there. So there's always this kind of missing of accountability on different ends of it. Something I've noticed as a pattern.
There is, and I'm glad you brought that up because it brings up sort of a related issue of just concern about these types of issues and proportionality. So, in the context of writing a response to this, which I haven't finished yet, I hope to have it done this month here, and I'm working with Marilyn Kulieke, as a co-author to develop a real response to this issue. It brought to mind uh, teachings from the Urantia book that concern overpopulation. And I think the phrase used is, you haven't had this problem yet, but in the near future, you're headed for it,
And
right?
we're in the near future now,
Right.
essentially.
And so this is a point, yes, like because that was written like near future. The reference point is 1935 for this paper, for this section of the Urantia book. So that's the time period we're talking about. So when it says something like the near future, we're talking about, for instance, what China did with their overpopulation issue, which they took so seriously, they instituted a law allowing only one child.
Right.
Obviously, reverse population regulations.
Mm-hmm.
And as many people are aware who've heard about this, what happened culturally was because of the preference for male children, then you had that type of um, preferencing being acted out uh, by these families.
Right. Right.
So I just wanted to say, like, if people are really concerned about eugenics and how it's happening on a global level and how it can be oppressive and coercive and government being all involved in it and what's it going to do to the gene pool or peace in the world or any of these issues, right? We actually have things going on in real time that are noticeable and significant and get ignored and never really talked about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want
to other types of problems in the past that we can't really do anything about, but the overpopulation of China and how they're trying to deal with it is still a current issue.
Oh yeah, yeah. And the result of them trying to control that population, because now they might have too many males, type of thing. There's always a result.
Yeah, and then that creates certain issues about peace and prosperity when you've got too many males in the population.
But you brought up a good point, and I want to get back to your experience in talking about maybe some of the things that you said while you were when you had your minutes behind the microphone at the district meeting, but. The fact of what we call eugenics, and because of political history, there's a dark overlay on it, as if everyone's some kind of dictator who wants to just have one master race. Anyone who says that about eugenics, but you brought up a good point in that this stuff is happening all around us. I mean, you can look at Planned Parenthood as a eugenics project, right? I think the level of scale of warfare that we're at, you look at what's going on over in Palestine and other places, you're changing populations of people by the level of impact that different countries can have on one another now. That's still a eugenic thing, whether it's called that or not. It's still affecting the bloodlines and people in our cultures. So we might want to look at it in a different way, and not so much is what's been horrified in Hollywood, and more along the lines of what we're actually doing. You look at the CRISPR ways of trying to get some of these diseases that are keeping us back, or malfunctions that are keeping us back. These are all ways of trying to uplift humanity's experience as it is than it is like just over dominance of some dark control or something.
Well, and you bring up a point there, implicitly in what you said that I think is important to tease out a little more, because this is one of the things that makes conversations about the subject extremely confusing and difficult, to get down to the fundamentals about in terms of trying to create public policy or this or that, or international relations. So there is the phrase ethnic cleansing, and there's the phrase genocide, right? Okay. So for instance, to pick a contemporary example of where these things can easily become confused in the conversation, because people get very passionate and they like to throw out terminology and be bold and powerful in what they're saying and accuse the other side of all the greatest, right, atrocities they can and all this stuff. So when people fight, when they're at war, and there's a losing side that's getting displaced, with respect to land, all right, like real war, like we're fighting over land, not just, you kill some of us, we'll kill some of you, and then we'll renegotiate, like fighting over land.
Right.
Okay. Whenever there's fighting over land, there's ethnic cleansing. That's basically what that means.
That's the goal, essentially.
That means somebody won a war that they're fighting.
Right.
And then the losing side will call it ethnic cleansing, and the winning side will say, we beat our adversary who was at war with us and we defeated them. And to the victor goes the spoils. They wanted the land that we were on. We wanted the land they were on. We fought over it. They lost. We won.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily mean that there's some major genetic component of difference involved with the conflict. There may or may not be.
Sure.
And even if there is some genetic difference, it doesn't mean that the losing side, by the fact that, let's say, their entire population got wiped out, that it has some, major effect on the whole global gene pool, as if, that particular genetic type was not represented anywhere else in the world with significant numbers.
Sure.
Right. And so these issues are important to distinguish because they relate directly to the issue of our gene pool and the health of our gene pool. What war does to it, what peace does to it, how all these things are interrelated. And, one of the things I had to sort of review in my study of all of this was the Urantia Book teachings about how religion, peace, and medicine can be dysgenic in comparison to natural selection. And this, I think, is a fundamental conversation that human beings really have a terrible time trying to wrap their heads around and talk about constructively, is that when there was natural selection, Darwinian survival of the fittest, which is compatible with Urantia Book teachings, with intelligent design, right? In those circumstances, average intelligence was constantly improving progressively because an idiot doesn't stand much chance in a primitive, culture where it's survival of the fittest and you're fighting tigers.
Nature is not merciful.
And nature is not merciful.
Yeah.
Not at all. And that lack of mercy from nature has a eugenic impact. It's just great for human beings. It just means that the average intelligence will keep improving because a, segment of the lower intelligence is going to die off more quickly and not be able to reproduce as much.
Sure.
Okay, so that's not a bad thing. That developed us to the point, in fact, where we could think about things like religion to the extent that we have regard for everybody, right? That could lead to trying to transcend war. Like we could get smart enough to not be so violent and primitive and animalistic, right?
Yeah, definitely.
We might even develop our sciences so that we don't die from diseases as much.
Well, right? I think that quality of character from having a higher power of God, that's a unifier of a standard. And so people can have these standards that they uphold, and it doesn't matter where you come from. God's here for all of us to have these standards to uphold. And that's that quality of thinking, quality of conduct that is a God-knowing individual, a God-loving individual that brings culture up. Right. That's uplifting.
But yet these mechanisms that are culturally uplifting can also be dysgenic.
Absolutely.
That's what the Urantia Book points out, and that's what culturally we have a hard time acknowledging and just being honest about. Like the whole goal is to figure out how to use religion and science, in a way that's not dysgenic, that allows us to move forward. In other words, we can have a broader spiritual appreciation. We can grow spiritually in our ideals and want to treat our fellow man better. We can be well-intentioned, but not actually be progressive.
Yeah.
We can take our good intentions and do things that actually destroy civilization.
Well,
we're that creative.
Yeah. Well, what you remind me of is that when there can be such intelligent design, and we're all children of God, so we're all creators innately, that you can move away from some of the challenges that build character and if you can create a way where there's too much ease-seeking and over-sentimentality,
Yes.
is when you can start to feed that which doesn't serve your greater good. And on a personal level, you can do that with yourself, and in institutional levels and other group ways where it sounds like the greatest thing because it's so poetic, but there's sentimental sophistry in that you're not focusing on that which is going to progress you forward. And so it's kind of just getting a quick hit of serotonin or something like that, that comfort, than it is of the discipline of understanding what the greater design is. And it doesn't mean be rude to somebody because that doesn't fit, survival of the fittest or something like strength and honor or something like that. It just means that, time and attention we only have so little of. And if you're gifted with the Spirit of God, then look for ways to bring the new design in, not so much of tradition that you get locked in and then you just keep doing that same thing over and over, and it becomes this mental security and you're not really uplifting and growing or really progressing.
So, to follow that up, I want to say, this issue of progress and what it means to compare contemporary standards to the past and take Urantia Book teachings in the context of 1935 and, how we're moving forward with them. We already mentioned issues of overpopulation and how that relates to China. It's just one example, not the only one, but
Sure.
One of the other things the Urantia Book talks about is how there's industrial servitude becoming the new norm in society, where we've gotten away from social slavery and gone towards economic slavery.
Right, debt slavery.
Yes, right. And so again, when these commentaries show up in the Urantia Book, there'll be like a word like presently or today or something that lets you know like the time period they're talking about.
Right.
And so I ended up doing a little bit of history on this and reminding myself of my own history, just the last 100 years and how that relates to the Urantia Book in 1935. Okay. But what happened in 1929, just 6 years before 1935, is we had the stock market crash, the Great Depression.
Right.
Right? Enormous financial collapse that was related to people playing the stock market, trying to be ambitious, taking on debt, in an effort to get ahead through the stock market. And what set all that up was the creation of the Fed in 1913.
And the income tax law came in then too, in 1913.
That's another form, yes, of servitude, right? Because this gets into the issue of the government taxing people to support people who can't support themselves.
So they say, yes.
Well, I mean, when people are looking for a government handout,
it's coming from tax revenue, yeah.
Coming from tax revenue. Yeah. And it could come from non-government agencies and organizations,
right?
Religious groups. And sure. I think when the Urantia Book talks about how the church has been dysgenic and uses the phrase, "this has all been well." What's that mean? Like we're hearing a paragraph where the church is being dysgenic and this phrase shows up, but this has all been well. And like for decades, I'm always trying to interpret this, and come up with a better interpretation of what that would mean. And most recently, I was just reflecting on this distinction between helping the poor through non-governmental agencies that are voluntary versus doing it through the government, which is enslaving, right? It's a completely different way to handle the problem, and it avoids all the philosophic, controversial, and practical problems. If there is public support to help people in need, the public can do it. They don't need to organize a government and then do it. They can just do it.
Or organized religions have done it as well.
Well, exactly. That's the people doing it separately from the government, right?
It's
just going to tax and be coercive. I'm just saying, like, there are all these creative ways, and people have used them, and that's why the church is mentioned as a institution of dysgenic function, at the same time saying it's all been well, because I'm now looking at it from the perspective that at least it's a proper institution taking on that type of issue.
Interesting.
Right.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Like, again, it can also be done on just a personal level. I'm not trying to say like it can only and needs to be done through, religious institutions. I'm just saying it's one example of a non-governmental way. People create all kinds of charities.
Well, I think what you're reminding me of in the Urantia Book, where it talks about having the service motive over the profit motive, and where these organizations can serve and profit in the same way. And you're seeing more of these types of independent businesses come up, where they do some really supportive work, where it'll be regenerative, or they'll like give back to wherever they're manufacturing somehow, where they're keeping integrity with what they're doing and trying to help others, and not making everybody else pay for their one project of service by being mandated through the government, which then brings up all sorts of other issues of overreach and control. But
it's really very simple. I mean, it comes down to taxes, right? When you have taxes involved, then people don't have the choice to do something that's considered nice and positive and progressive. They're required to do it, and people disagree about what's, appropriate that way, and to what degree they should be required to carry the burden of others.
Yeah.
And that's a reasonable enough issue. How much does my family have to pay for your family? Why? Right? I'm not saying there isn't an answer, but there's probably going to be some qualifications and restrictions, if people are going to get along. So at any rate, I just think it's nice the way the Urantia book reminds us of these conflicting cross currents of social evolution that are all part of progress, but they're messy. And if people rush to conclusions, and with something like the Urantia book, it's easy to do that. Because, see, this is the thing, just generally speaking, if the topic is as broad as eugenics, race, culture, family, government, all this stuff, right? And reasonable minds naturally are going to differ widely on such controversial, complex subjects. Well, what that means then is whenever you've got anybody or anything like a book, that's making statements, it's easy to attack it ignorantly and make a show of it.
Sure. Because
you already have this backdrop of polarization where you can just latch on to anything misrepresented however you want, or even represented truly. I mean, if it is a controversial subject, you can just play it up. Anything's possible. And anyone who comes out with any kind of statement, just by the fact that they've gotten, grounded and anchored in something, easily becomes a target. And of course, the Urantia revelation being so complex and well spoken on all these integrations of subject matter, it takes a long time to appreciate, and people don't want to give it the time, and they have their agenda, and the young lady will probably get into a nice left-wing college of her choice because
this made her career.
She repeated the pattern that she saw her contemporaries doing, and it would naturally lead to results in a certain way if she wants to, use that on a essay or something to get into
Right.
college or university.
Well, it's a cultural issue that we do deal with on multiple facets. I mean, you look at a lot of this comes down to what Jesus was up against. You know, is he was trying to end that "thou shalt not" laws, right? And so everyone looked at what you're not supposed to do, all these laws of Moses, and then it was just like, no, stone them. No, that's blasphemy. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. And then it's all like, all right, you cannot do this, you cannot do that, and you cannot do that. Where he was kind of empowering this, all of us as individuals, of to go forth doing good as opposed to judged by this list of laws, and if anything's going against it, then you're righteous in how you damn it. And that's more of like a hall monitor type of mentality than it is of kind of having real liberty under the umbrella of being a child of the Creator here. So it doesn't take any high level of intelligence to just cancel somebody or to doubt it or to poke questions. But it does take real sense of truth and experience and wisdom to be able to answer those questions and to navigate an uncertain path. And that's something that Alvin Kulieke was trying to do. And so for his name and kind of legacy to be a little tarnished because of one quick bite from a younger person, while it might be trending, it's certainly not sustainable. And so maybe we could go back to some of those things that you brought up while you're in that meeting.
Well, yeah, I thank you, because I think some of the particulars are important to mention. You know, how the Urantia book gets unfairly defamed. There's patterns to this. So one of the easy ways to defame the Urantia book is in relationship to the fact that it claims to be a revelation. It doesn't claim human authorship.
Right.
So someone who wants to defame the book is speaking to an audience that doesn't believe it's a revelation. That's pretty much everyone. Okay, that's clear, right? Okay, so this audience that doesn't believe it's a revelation is curious. Well, who really wrote the thing, right? Where did it come from? Okay.
Right.
So the obvious answer to anyone who's doing a quick broad brush look at it from a perspective of incredulity, of disbelief, and, this is not a revelation. Who wrote it? Just tell me who wrote it. Well, William Sadler must have wrote it. He's the person most associated with the early development of the Urantia book, and he was a doctor and psychiatrist and wrote books himself about race and eugenics, and published extensively during his life.
Right.
And so it became easy to find things that he wrote that were related to the efforts in World War II that had lots of race and eugenics issues built into them. And Dr. Sadler wrote things that are absolutely in conflict with Urantia book teachings. Okay, so for specifically like on hybridization. Dr. Sadler spoke out against blacks and whites hybridizing.
Right.
If you look up the word hybridization in the Urantia book, it shows up 4 times, and in all 4 of those paragraphs, it's talking about the value of hybridization and specifically how dominant genes are important to this process. And, it just couldn't be more clear in its obvious support for hybridization.
And it fills in, if I can just add on top of that, that the only real challenge negative around that hybridization is a social response, that you're going to get some bigotry, you might get some other challenges for the individual who's so hybridized, I believe.
Well, yes and no. So that is the most important point, is the one you're making, because it gets so terribly misrepresented, right? The Urantia book says that bigotry is a bigger issue than hybridizing wisely, right? Okay, so that gets obviously misrepresented, but hybridizing wisely also gets misrepresented.
Sure.
Okay,
sure.
Because if you're denying that the Urantia book even supports that, then you're not going to be addressing how it can be done with greater or less wisdom. And the Urantia book is specific about saying that hybridization of the lowest intelligence strata, while producing some results, is not really the way to move forward. That's not going to be the best program, and that we need to think, structurally in terms of people under the bell curve, people who are especially intelligent, and people who are especially not intelligent.
Right.
And the
Yeah.
Urantia book is very specific in saying we need to manage ourselves by fostering under the bell curve, the common man.
Right. Exactly.
It specifically says don't try
Yeah.
to create a super race and work it up
Right.
from
Right.
just your most, accomplished.
And they say that from that common pool is where these remarkable mutations pop up too.
Absolutely.
That's where you get these geniuses coming out of what you might say just average people or whatever.
So obviously, people who are defaming the Urantia book aren't bringing this up. They are misrepresenting this aspect of the teachings, either ignorantly or worse. That's pretty much the spectrum we've got. And so referring to Doc Sadler is an obvious way to defame the Urantia book, but let's consider how overtly illogical it is to do that. I mean, it really is bizarre when you think about it. People are saying the Urantia book is bad because Doc Sadler wrote it and he had bad ideas. But what the Urantia book actually says doesn't reflect what Dr. Sadler said. It's consistent with contemporary progressive ideas about genetics and hybridization.
Right.
So in fact, Dr. Sadler was involved with promoting a book that had ideas more advanced than his own.
Right.
Now, that's the real story about Dr. Sadler. That's the real story about Alvin Kulieke. That's, in a sense, the real story about all of us.
Right.
Who get involved with the Urantia book, because the teachings in the Urantia book are superior to what we're able to live up to. Right? It's got all the idealism and practicality and wisdom, and that we can handle.
It's a bar that's set really high. I mean, Epical Revelation is a high bar that's set for a planet.
Right. So, in that sense, if anybody does a true enough study of the Urantia revelation and compares any of us to it,
yeah, good luck.
You're gonna look bad by comparison. Okay. I can
That's a
live
good
with
point.
that.
That's a great point, though. I'm glad you put it that way, because I think in our culture, we're always looking for who's the darling of, or who's the face of something. And especially if you're a very secular person, you don't believe that anything could have come through by higher intelligence. So you're like, no, there's some charlatan out there. And then let's just judge him by his human position and not realize that none of us are perfect, and that we still have a discernment within us that when we recognize something that's of high value, it doesn't make us any worse or better or whatever, but we're acknowledging something that we'd like to strive towards. Think of the apostles and Jesus. I mean, especially, Paul. Paul he didn't even live with Jesus, but he took on a lot of leadership responsibilities in the early parts of the church. And, a lot of the theological rhetoric is because of him and his different upbringing and not being around Jesus so much. But yet he is a poster child for a lot of this stuff. And it's kind of like what you're saying with Sadler. Sadler recognized the value of this great effort of getting this publication out. It doesn't mean that he is the source of it, but it's just a face that's so closely associated with that.
Christian theology addresses this specifically, and we're more familiar with it in this country, but I think just, generally, I want to say religionists all have their own way of saying pretty much that God works through imperfect people.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You don't want to reject faith just because people who are faithful are imperfect with trying to progress life and move things forward. And I think that type of maturity is foundational to civilization making progress. But unfortunately, in atheistic and agnostic cultures, philosophies, that perspective doesn't resonate. It's just they don't have the foundation for that.
Yeah, it's not on the value
destiny,
scale.
right?
Yeah.
It's not part of this process of perfection, and we have a destiny that we're going to, and we know who and what our source is and how that cycle works.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, I think in all of us, there's this level of insecurity as humans, and it takes a lot of humility to be born again, born new, born of the Spirit. And it might be seen as something weak or something disingenuous, but like I can readily say Jesus is my master and I don't have another one. Like I've committed myself to him and his teachings. And that a lot of people aren't willing to surrender that and that what that experience is. And so that's where there's this uncomfortability of relation around that dynamic, because we receive a whole new set of values from the creator of all. And if you are saying that you have some kind of conflict with that, do you feel that there's this level of like deep insecurity? Because I remember before I really fully accepted Jesus, I almost felt like a competitive edge with someone like him, because why is he so special and why can't I accomplish those things or something like that? And so there was never this curiosity. But until I got to certain places in my life, there was such a humbling and recognizing of the value of his real teachings and real words in what I was starting to value and what I was growing into, that I readily recognized how important he is. It's like, it's the truth, the way, the life, like it's for all of us. And I just wonder, where does that insecurity for an individual lie, where they feel that they just have to cancel or disprove or doubt all the time? And that's where their value and identity comes from, as opposed to someone who is empowered by their identity as being a child of God. It's like they're always trying to cancel things or something that way. I don't know.
Right. This is where I think you put it very well. Generally speaking, you talked about how faith creates a type of spiritual humility that is a necessary and important check and balance on the ego.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
When people don't have that type of check and balance, they end up playing God in one way or another.
Yeah.
Is what happens. Is without God, we are our own
You're
gods.
God. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we see that happening, and it kind of brings us around to something that I want to remind us about, because of how it plays into everything going on today in these current circumstances up in the Chicago area with that high school and everything going on. Mm-hmm. Is that back in 1927 is when we had wait, is that what I was saying? 1927. Sorry, that was Buck versus Bell. The Supreme Court made a decision about sterilizing people who were quote unquote promiscuous and had become a burden to the state and of low intelligence. And the Supreme Court said that basically 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. Right?
Right.
Okay, so that's where we were 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. Is wrestling with this issue of how less intelligent people become a burden to society. People do care about them. They end up in institutions, right? And how they end up in institutions and whether they're always properly put there is a fair question. And it's a fair question in this particular case. You know, whether the people involved with this particular case really were good examples of the issue or not.
Right.
But whether they were good examples or not, there are examples, and it is an issue. People become a burden to society when procreation goes on unchecked among the least intelligent in our gene pool, and we have a capitalistic society. We have circumstances where the economic environment can take advantage of them.
Yeah.
Everybody can take advantage of them.
Yeah. Okay, so I would like to maybe support some of our viewers and other Urantia Book readers out there if they're ever faced with this opportunity or this challenge, maybe at a party or something where someone kind of confronts them almost confrontationally around reading the Urantia Book, and they bring up these same topics. I think it's a valuable way, the experience that you had, that maybe it can support some other people's defense of some of these complex topics. I know when you were at that district meeting, you were speaking on hybridization, as we talked about earlier, and some other concepts. I was hoping maybe you could give a little reflection of your experience, and maybe so we could support other Urantia Book readers out there that could use a little language around this.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the easiest ways to encapsulate it for people is to say that God created a genetic spectrum that was designed to hybridize. So when we look at the races as all creatively developed by God, and that we're all children of God, and the intention was for us to mix so that we become one race with the hybridization of multiple characteristics, that gets rid of issues of trying to create a master race. As soon as you talk about the value of hybridization, you're not talking about genocide. Like that wouldn't make any sense if the goal is hybridization.
Right.
And so that's a real easy concept that people understand about genes, and they like that. Hey, it's great to mix and match. Yeah, that's what the Urantia Book says too, always has. Anyone who says different is either ignorant or worse. Right. So I think that's kind of like the quickest key into dispelling fears and addressing misconceptions. And then the thing that's related to that we talked about is that the Urantia Book supports just trying to improve the average man, just trying to work, with welfare. And so even within the context of, making improvements and so forth, it's focused on the average and not the extremes. I think these are important things to mention and that people understand them quickly enough. That's what I brought up at the board meeting, was that she said the Urantia Book was against hybridization. And so I mentioned the words, comes up 4 times. Look it up yourself. All of these paragraphs are 4 square behind it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate the knowledge there, and knowing that most people who are going to confront you negatively around the Urantia Book haven't read it either. So they almost feel like it's an easy disprove if they don't go and look at it at all. It's because it doesn't fall under the category of some of this easy spiritual publications. Like, this is complex. You devoted like majority of his life trying to get this stuff together. Like, Chuck and I work on this stuff all the time. That's what we do. We're committed to this stuff. He's been doing it for like 50 years or whatever. So this isn't an easy thing to pull out. It's really easy to just kind of cancel, but it reminds me of what the Urantia Book talks about, why people hated Jesus. And they hated him because they didn't take the time to know him. And if they'd known him, they would have loved him. And so it's so easy to hate in ignorance and keeping yourself ignorant. But again, it's that insecurity, undeveloped ego that's just, if I don't know it, I hate it. And so there's been all these traps and snares laid for us who are trying to get these teachings out. There's so much language that's weaponized around some of these key concepts and components. And, wars and historical interpretation haven't helped. But it's, like I said earlier, it's easy to doubt and make questions and whatnot. But it's hard to do it in spite of all that stuff.
One of the thoughts that I try to keep in mind, and I think communicates easily enough to help other people appreciate how, open-minded we need to be about all these issues, is that philosophically, we can just imagine, say, two parents from different racial types having a bunch of children. Mm-hmm. And, amongst those children, there's all kinds of variations related to the social issues that we face these days. Differences in intelligence, differences in choices, differences in dispositions, differences in experience, what the world brings to them. Parents have to deal with these things. They have to love all their children the same, but treat them as individuals. And so if we just start philosophically in that kind of context, what would it be like if, you have parents and they've got children who have these type of differences? Their children have different beliefs about God. Their children have different beliefs about abortion. They have different beliefs about science, about history, about everything.
Right.
And they love all their children and are trying to figure out how to keep the family together in the midst of this type of diversity that is unavoidable once you start to have, a number of people.
Sure.
But when we think about it just in terms of a couple of parents trying to deal with that type of diversity within one nuclear family, right? I think it helps us access the open-mindedness and the open-heartedness that generates the best thinking and the best ideas. And it then allows us, with that foundation, to move forward into the complexities of our greater world, society, and culture and government in a way where we're not so quick to call people haters or, assert bigotry or ill intention on some level.
Yeah.
And so I think on a practical level, a little philosophy that way, just a thought experiment, can have incredible practical value. Like in any conversation just on the street, we can turn it into, well, imagine if you were the parent of two children who thought differently on these two issues, what would you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. I like that model, for example, because it also serves for many controversial issues. Like I use that model when I'm trying to give my opinion on the atonement doctrine. And that what loving parent would kill one of his children for everybody, for the doings of another child.
Right. A great example. Yeah. It explains things so quickly. It's just marvelously efficient. What Jesus gave us that way. Think of everyone as family and God as your father, and think from that perspective, like genuinely think from that perspective.
Act accordingly.
That too.
Well, I just want to, share my appreciation of you sharing your experience, and hopefully we can do this again soon. I was thinking maybe we could do some talking about some of this ancient history stuff, break down some of these cool projects and stuff, because I know people are interested in some of that stuff, some of these other things you've worked on. But for now, I really appreciate your contribution with this podcast and your efforts, what you've done. So keep us keep in touch with all of your findings, please. And so
thank you. I'm working on this article now with Marilyn. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about it before it's done, because it helps me organize my thoughts a bit and work on it. But I'm hoping by Jesus' birthday to have it done.
Oh, wow.
Uh, if not at the end of the month, as soon as I can. It's the main thing to do right now. And maybe once that's done, that'll free my mind up to talk about other subjects, and I'll be able to reference that, to people as a resource,
Yeah, that'd be
for
great.
dealing with this, and we'll be at a next step, at that point. I definitely have some more work to do before I can really entertain other conversations. I'm kind of obsessed at this point with this
Well,
particular
sounds good.
treatise
Yeah.
done and available to people. So thank
Well,
you for the opportunity so
oh
much.
yeah, I know we'll get the opportunities as our projects get finished. I wish you the best on your work. Send my regards to Marilyn.
Yes.
Everyone. I love David. I loved David. He was my guy in Chicago. So all my best to the Kulieke family. And
Absolutely.
thanks, Halbert. Thanks,
God
Halbert.
bless. Thank you.
Well, thank you guys for joining us. That was a valuable conversation. Please stay tuned for more. God bless.